Hello, you beautiful, sexy, outstanding people. Zach Couples here, and I have a question for you. Do you struggle setting up efficient systems so you can get things done? Do you have a hard time establishing and building a culture in your office or within yourself? Are you uncertain how you best function in the workforce? Then you'll probably want to listen to today's interview because I brought in Kyle Dobbs, who owns Compound Performance in St. Louis, Missouri. And this is his thing. Aside from being an awesome coach, he focuses with personal trainers, coaches, physical therapists, as well as gyms on building exactly what I just said, establishing the culture, making sure that leaders are in place and managing people effectively, making systems efficient so we can maximize revenue streams and results. And he talks a lot about personality archetyping as well in this very long but very awesome interview. I hope that you like it. I hope you get as much out of it as I did. And without further ado, let's give Kyle Dobbs a shot.
You have an incredibly unique skill set that you are offering to folks like us in the industry. And I'm in regards to setting up system building, organization, creating a healthy culture within companies and businesses. And I think that that's something that is vastly underappreciated within our field, because you can have a wonderful idea, but if your execution is lackluster, whether it's business, in person, or online, you're likely going to fail. And I think a lot of people fail because they just don't have those systems in place. So that's why I wanted to bring you in to the show. Tell me though, how the heck did you get into this? Like, how does Kyle Dobbs, a yoked bro with a better beard and better hair than I am in arms, get into building systems, building culture with people? Like, what's your story?
Yeah, I mean, I started as a trainer, just like a lot of other people out there, and as I grew with that, I got really passionate into development, mostly from a training and physiological side of things. And that development and education did eventually lead me into leadership and management. And with that, I started building out a lot of the organizational skills and general communication skills that I try to use now. And as I got into upper management and managing managers and directing departments and things of that nature, I got into a position in my last job where I was consulting with not only trainers and fitness facilities, but high-level executive teams within the finance community, which within large real estate companies in the New York market. And I was working on a team with it was myself and a behavioral psychologist at the time. And we were working on inter-office relationships and communication to decrease essentially autonomic stress. So looking at environmental coherence within both the office space and also within their home lives, and then trying to also integrate intelligent training into that. So it's taking 90-day blood work with people, looking at stress markers, looking at androgynous sex hormones, micronutrient deficiencies, whatever, all that good stuff. And then we were also measuring HRV on a daily basis. So looking at autonomic hyperactivity and HPA axis hyperactivity within the client base themselves. And those were kind of the diagnostics we were testing from a physiological standpoint. At the same time, we were running personality archetypes on them and seeing what their actual environmental and communication preferences were. And with that, developing the tools within the awareness within the individuals themselves first, of understanding, what they prefer and how they prefer to be communicated with and how they perceive other archetypes. A lot of this stuff is very subconsciously driven, right? It's very subcortical. You're not necessarily aware of what those preferences are. And we find that people, instead of working within environments that they're more acclimated to, instead in 2018 where we are, they acclimate and adapt to work environments and work demands that drive money, right? And finance and all those things that we want from a social construct standpoint. And that's fine. You know, humans are the great improvisers, right? We adapt better than anything else ever, right? So even though we had the ability to adapt and to do so very well, we were finding that those adaptations still drove high levels of autonomic stress and sympathetic tone. So people are running around all day and night, right? If they're not regulating at home, with higher blood pressure, higher heart rate, higher core body temperature, and then looking at higher cortisol levels, higher adrenaline levels, lower testosterone levels, especially in men, and also decreased cognitive function. They were kind of amygdala driven, being overly sympathetic. So from a work productivity standpoint, that was also suffering, right? So that's how we kind of got the buy-in from the corporate institutions themselves. And a lot of this was counteracted by the work we were doing, right? First bringing out the self-awareness, and then working with them in groups as teams on building out communication strategies with one another and with peer-to-peer, and then with management to employee. So finding out how to actually speak to one another in a way that was both efficient and effective given their archetype, and also setting an environment that was conducive to those archetypes working well together with one another. And then also leveraging people's unique skill sets based on those archetypes for the success of the whole, right? Giving them more purpose within the team, but doing so in a way that really leveraged their individual strengths rather than maybe what their job demands might have been. So kind of doing a little bit of reorganization from that standpoint as well. And for me, that just was incredibly intriguing and satisfying. So when I left that company and did my journey back to the Midwest, I essentially started a consulting company, and I work now with strength and conditioning facilities, personal training facilities, and then individuals within a mentorship program where I use a lot of the same tools to help them with their teams and with their client bases on a smaller scale, which is great for me because it blends fitness with the actual leadership and community building of what I was doing before.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, I think that's the first time you've laid that story out. Like the fact that you were very scientific about making the changes with your previous job is cool. Are you now with your clients right now, are you still tracking some of those variables? Are you having them measure HRV? And
if they want to, I make that an optional thing. What I work with the most with the people I work with now is just looking at work performance. And a lot of them, especially being in fitness, a lot of them are tracking autonomics somehow anyway, right? So it's something that more so where they're actually doing the tracking of that because they're excited about it. I offer the blood work as a third-party option. I work with Inside Tracker based out of Boston. So I offer that as a third party at cost for them, just to look at, kind of beginning, middle, and end numbers and look for improvements over time there. But it is a pretty healthy expense, so not everybody takes advantage of it. But the majority of them do measure their own HRV, or at the very least measure morning heart rate and look for changes off a baseline, right? They know that if they're plus 10 to 15 beats per minute for a week, that they're probably undergoing some kind of systemic stress, right? So we look for just trends going lower with that. And same thing with HRV is we don't look at it that acutely. It's always looking at trends and looking at maybe environmental changes we can make prior to changes in the way they're training, because all these individuals are also knowingly and willingly and actually, proactively accruing stress on a daily basis as well. So you have to differentiate at that point the physical and mechanical stress of training to the psychological and cognitive stress of incoherence from a lifestyle standpoint. So there's a lot of reading data and then asking a lot of questions, looking at what their lifestyle is kind of going through at that point, rather than looking at, maybe increased training demands or things of that nature acutely.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I mean, as long as you have some, I think obviously the relevant KPI there is work performance, key performance indicators. So as long as you're tracking that, I mean, I think everything else is gravy.
Yeah, that's what it all boils down to.
Yeah, absolutely.
HRV and some of the physiological metrics with people that are in fitness are so multifactorial that, one, I don't want to get a false positive, but I also don't want to get a false negative based on some of those other things. So at the end of the day, they're coming to me for work performance, not for improved HRV. So that's what I'm going to be looking at. And we do that through a series of OKRs and some other principles that we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's really what I'm looking at. So my systems kind of also turn into the progress reports of sorts.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, I do want to dive into systems a bit more, but just because you've piqued my interest now, in terms of you getting into change or establishing these archetypes within the people you worked with in the past, and having that be the intervention that you did at work, was what led you to thinking that was the big change that needed to be made in order to positively impact both work performance and these variables? For example, did you, like when you measured HRV or maybe some of the stress hormones, I don't know if you did a spit test or whatever, but let's say HRV because that's probably easier. Did you notice a difference in terms of the HRV measures when they were at the office or on work days versus days they had off, if it was the weekends or vacation? And if so, how did that lead you to going with communication as your primary intervention?
It was a little bit of both. We definitely saw that over weekends, systemic stress really wasn't going down. Like, it was staying high over the course of a 2-day span. And a lot of it was because these people also had terrible lifestyle habits. And they also, especially being in New York, they didn't leave work at work, right? Their weekends were still stress-filled, right? They're still answering emails. They're still thinking about work all the time. A lot of them actually dreaded weekends because of the work they might lose once we started actually talking to them about that process. But we did notice when people went on vacations, we'd see a little change early on, but the longer the vacation went on, the more it would go back to normal because they'd start getting stressed about missing work. Right. So their lives were being determined and dictated by their work rather than the other way around. And from a communication standpoint, a lot of that information came from the behavioral psychologist I was working with. She'd been doing a little bit of work on this prior to working with me. She was already consulting with a few other companies and really taught me a lot about that process. But as I was learning it, it was also really becoming applicable to the training that I was seeing from, managing trainers and managing managers, and looking at, what makes a trainer successful from a professional basis. And a lot of it that I noticed throughout the years had more to do with how they interacted with their clients, how they engaged with them, and how they set that environment, rather than the amount of technical expertise they actually possessed. And this is something that, is always frustrating to trainers who really value education, right? And we have a bias towards education because that's our interest. This is something that's always frustrated people. And to be truthful, frustrated me in the past as a trainer. I'm a very introverted individual, and communication has been something that I've always had to really work at. As far as being able to speak to different people, especially different people of different personality types and interests in that in myself. And a lot of trainers are so highly focused on the aspect of training and not the aspect of the other 165 hours a week that their clients go through, that they speak to them as if they might be trainers themselves, right? And trainers that maybe were missing or lacking on education, but maybe more extroverted in personality, I noticed we're talking to these clients about their lives, you know, about their communities, about their relationships, things that we might think are trivial from a training perspective, you know, previously, but are actually really important in setting the tone for lifestyle coherence and recovery, and just purposefulness, right? We're having all this success, and they were setting the environment for training. They were making it a anticipatory event rather than an obligation for their clients. It was something they were looking forward to coming to, and it was all based on the relationship they were forming. And so as I was learning more about the archetypes and more about environmental coherence, it really started, you know, a light bulb kind of went off in my head that these principles are the same thing, right? Whether you're in an office building or whether you're, you know, you're an executive or whether you're a trainer is really irrelevant when you start talking about relationships. It's still people to people, right? And social norms play a role, and roles within, you know, those norms, all environments play a role as well. But at the end of the day, people want to be communicated with in a language and on terms that they understand. And if you can get people to do that and teach them, you know, make them aware of that process and educate them on strategies to do so, they're going to be more successful in any endeavor they're in, right? It's made the process for myself has made me a better husband and father. It's made me a better friend, you know, which for me is way more impactful than, you know, being a better trainer or manager in a sense, you know, but it all crosses over. It's principle based. So it applies to everything contextually.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing that most everyone is lacking in some degree is connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially too with the advent of technology and how we're always glued to these, most people.
Yes.
No one's ever taught the soft skills of how to have a conversation or how to build connection or rapport or anything. And I mean, you've trained countless people, Kyle, and I can't imagine how many of those you develop close bonds with. And eventually it becomes to the point where you're doing the same shit, but the reason why they're with you is because they think you're a good person, and they just like that is their one time they get to just hang out with someone that they enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what's adherence, right? You know, from a contextual standpoint, the vast majority of the clients I've trained over the years have no knowledge of program design or periodization or anatomy and physiology, but they do know what a good experience looks like. They do know what engagement looks like. They do know what communication looks like, and they know if they're enjoying themselves or not. That's what gets people coming back. And if a trainer can combine technical expertise with those, you know, soft skills, they're going to crush it. You know, that's what it comes out to be. And the downside of that is I've seen way more people become successful with soft skills and little to none technical expertise than I have the other way around. So we really might be fooling ourselves with what's actually the most important for the client. Right? We feed that bias of education a lot, and we justify a lot of our actions by it. And I've invested, you know, a lot of money in education, and I value education. I've been an educator, but you also have to think outside of the box and how you approach a demographic that is not fitness based. If they were fitness based, they wouldn't need you, right? If they understood anatomy and physiology and training and periodization and the required ownership. I'm not a big motivation or accountability fan, but the required ownership to get to their goals from a physical standpoint, they wouldn't be paying you to train them. And I think that's something that trainers have to understand, that training is a choice for their client base, and they have to enjoy the experience, right? You're not necessarily educating them on how to become a trainer. You're not teaching them Latin with all the anatomy and physiology you may know. you're providing them a path to fitness that they actually enjoy, so you can build habit change within their lives. And they're no longer intimidated or scared by fitness or physical activity, but they actually look forward to it and starting, integrating it into the other parts of their lives as well.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And hearing that as a trainer should excite you, because I think we do spend so much time, effort, energy learning the training side of things to the nth degree of depth, getting into cranial motion and, all types of stuff. And no one gives a shit about that if they don't like you. So that's why I think what you offer is so essential in that regard. And I think that the personality test that you utilize is probably an easy barrier to entry for someone who wants to expand on their communication skills with others. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about the DISC? I know that's one of your initial intake things that you utilize. Tell me a little bit about what the letters are about, how you use that to inform decisions or inform your decision making in terms of what people need to set up their systems, and how that's useful to help someone from a communication standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, in a broad sense, the DISC is definitely kind of my weapon of choice. And most people, once they get their report back, are extremely surprised at just how accurate it is. And, that's another reason I continue to use it, is because so far I haven't had any complaints or any resistance to it once people started seeing the results of it. It laid them out pretty truthfully on paper. And it's 4 archetypes, right? You have the D, the I, the S, and the C. And the D and the I are more extroverted archetypes, and the S and the C are more introverted. And then the D and the C are more analytical archetypes, and the I and the S are more novelty based. So just based off of those 2 things, which I actually don't dive super deep into it with trainers, because a lot of them aren't going to be running, the DISC itself on their client basis. So it's more so if we can get even a fairly superficial view of what the archetypes prefer from a communication standpoint and environmental standpoint, and how to maybe identify them in the people, just through how they interact with their own environments, they're going to have enough strategies at that point to have a more efficient and effective conversation. I don't think everyone who takes this needs to become a psychologist, and I'm definitely not one. But I do think it's very similar to like a movement assessment, right? We go to a movement assessment and we start analyzing gait, and then we're walking down the street, and everybody in front of us, everybody we see has a hip shift or internal rotation, or they're pronating, right? There's a wing scap here and an elevated shoulder blade here. And we're just picking all these things out, and we really can't turn it off, right? With that, there's going to be a lot of different interventions that we might be able to use. The DISC is very similar. You can go into a room and see where people are positioned within that room and how they're interacting with the other people in that room, and have a pretty good idea of what archetype they are. And from there, you can start building out communication strategies if that is somebody that you want to communicate with. So like a D archetype is a very kind of dominant archetype. That's what the D stands for. You usually find them in leadership positions because they're naturally drawn to leadership, and not everybody is. They are very analytical, but they're also fairly dopaminergic in the fact that they want challenge and they want to win a lot of the time. So they sometimes push and rush through things in order to get to the mean, right? And it's a means to an end to get to the end of the project. You can find them in a room fairly easy because they're extroverted, and they'll usually be in the middle of the room kind of dominating conversation. they like to challenge ideas. So in your conversation with them, but they're people that you really have to provide evidence to, within a conversation, if you've got ideas or something to bring up. And they're people that like to win more than be right a lot of the times. So arguing with them is typically not something that is going to yield a return for any of the other archetypes. So you've got them, and then you've got I's, who are very, they're very novelty based. They're very extroverted. They're usually the life of the party. They like to be the center of attention, and they like to be entertained, and they like to entertain in that respect. And if you're training an I, right, a linear program where they're isolated in the corner of a room using maybe one modality for an extended period of time is not going to be something that works well for them. They're going to get bored very quickly, right? So you can set up your programming and your periodization around that archetype and that personality type to keep them engaged with the program. And they're a little harder to train, right? Because you have to look at their needs based on the assessment and look at their goals, and you have to implement enough exercise selection variation while still trying to accommodate the same outcomes throughout their programming to keep them entertained and keep them happy, which is not always an easy task to do, because we're so, as trainers, like, reps are everything, right? Like, if you want to get good at something, you have to practice, you have to repeat it, you have to be able to scale it in progressions and regressions. Well, if you've got somebody who gets really bored really easily, you might never get to all the reps needed to actually see the outcomes you want, because they're off doing boutique fitness or spin class, right? And the way you also approach the different archetypes with praise and feedback is very important, because everybody likes feedback, but not everybody likes public praise. Some people get very embarrassed by it. So you also want to make sure that people are very comfortable with how you're communicating with them from that respect. And I want you to throw a parade for them every time they accomplish, a new metric or hit a new goal of some sort. Like, they want everybody in the room to know it, and that's great. And S, the next one down the line, they just want a fist bump, man. That's it. They want a good job, and we're moving on. They're more novelty based, but they're also more introverted. So they want to be engaged, and they want a little bit of structure and a little bit of uniformity, but they also want room to work within that structure, a little bit of autonomy. So again, you're going to program them different. You're going to manage them different from a management and leadership standpoint, because they love feedback, but they have a hard time asking for it. If they feel like they are appreciated within a company or within a client-trainer relationship from what they're doing in a session, they're going to work as hard as they can to make everybody happy. They're very much pleasers, right? They're people that usually work in service. A lot of trainers are S's. And if they didn't love fitness, they would probably be teachers or nurses or something of that nature, because that's what their archetype is typically drawn to outside of fitness. And if they're not getting the right kind of feedback and the right kind of appreciation, they really withdraw within a company. And they're not going to cause conflict or friction within a company. They're just going to become disengaged and apathetic, right? Which is just as bad, and you don't want that to happen as well. And I think we've all seen that happen in clients before. If they're not getting the right kind of feedback, and they just become disengaged and apathetic to not only the program, but maybe the trainer, right? They move on. They're either moving on to a new trainer, or maybe they're just out of fitness. They had a bad experience, and now they're intimidated by it, and they're done with it, right? So there's a lot of different ways to look at that. And then you've got your C's. C's are very analytical. They're the people that come to every conversation or every Facebook thread with 5 PubMed articles ready to cut and paste into a conversation and link to. They're the science based. They want everything backed up. But the problem is sometimes they don't get anything done because they're too busy researching. There's never enough information, right? So they end up paralysis by analysis, right? They're also a very introverted, analytical, archetype. And when you're talking about training them, that's where like a linear program works really well with somebody, because they have the patience to look at change over time, and they don't want to skew the variables. They think novelty is distracting and chaotic and frustrating. So they're the people that, yeah, we're going to do barbell workouts for the next 8 weeks, and we're going to look at your, you know, your rep percentage maxes, and we're going to look at bar speed. And like, if you can bring data and analytics anywhere into a session, they're the people that are actually going to be interested in it. So there's definitely different communication strategies and different ways that you can implement environment and communication into training when you're working with those people as well. And then like, from a manager perspective, it's all about utilizing their strengths and putting them in positions to succeed, and then offering support in the way that they actually want support, right? Because what might feel like a nice structured environment for a C or an S is going to feel like micromanaging to an I. So you know when to push the gas and pull the brakes back a little bit for a lot of these people. And then how to give them feedback that's actually going to promote, you know, progress rather than maybe too much reflection and frustration. So it's definitely something that I use a lot, and that I think the people that I work with find very applicable to the demographics they're working with, either as a manager with their employees or as a trainer with their client base.
Gotcha. Okay. And just for clarification, so D is dominance.
Yep.
I is...
of course you're going to ask me what they actually stand for.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
Well, I know C is compliance.
Yeah, C is compliance and S is service.
Service or submissive?
Submissive.
Just personality. I know this is going to kill me. I'm just very... man, it is going to kill me. Dominance, influence, steadiness,
influence,
and conscientiousness.
There we go.
Okay. Awesome. No, I think that's really cool, because then it allows you to stratify how you want to interact and manage specific people. And, you know, just the little bit that I have learned from yourself, and just some of the stuff that Lucy has sent me, it's been very informative about just why people are the way they are. And it is pretty crazy how accurate it is. So I'll link that in the show notes about it. If people want to fill out the DISC personality, because I think it is quite useful.
Yep.
So let's say that we have the fam who's listening. They fill out the DISC, and they find out that they are, which archetype they are, or the mix of these specific archetypes. Mm-hmm. Like when I filled it out, I know I'm predominantly I, with a little hint of D, if you know what I'm sizzling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that surprise you, or
no?
Like, yeah, you didn't even fill it out, Zach. It just happened. So let's say that they fill this out, and they're looking at maximizing communication with others, one, but also they want to maybe make themselves more organized, help themselves work more efficiently, because I know a lot of people in the industry are go-getters. They have their own thing, and they want to get shit done. Mm-hmm. With each of those, where do you see common pitfalls in system building? And if let's say you are the one who's guiding them into becoming organized AF, where would you start with each of these people in terms of designing a system for them?
So, I mean, from a systems perspective and from an organizational standpoint, obviously they all approach that a little differently, and they all have unique pitfalls. You know, with your Ds, they typically are so hard charging that they don't weigh all their options ahead of time. They don't look at return, and they don't look at cost as much as maybe they should. They have a little bit of the shiny object syndrome that you also see with Is, but they will drive harder forward, and they'll be more focused on it, and they'll kind of leave everything else into on the back burner. They're very prone to specificity and thought and a driver. So a lot of that with them is making sure from an organizational standpoint that they dedicate enough times to the other things to keep them on track and don't just let those things fall behind. Because none of us live in a very, specific environment where from a demand standpoint, we can chase one thing over all others without accruing a cost of some sort. So from a systems perspective, we do a lot of, I do the OKRs with everybody, but how they interpret those strategies are going to be different given calendar work, making things automated. D's work really well with automated and automation. We talked a little bit about how you go about your things with that, just because those things are, because they sometimes become out of sight, out of mind. If they're not, automation is a good way to make sure that things get sent out, whether it's newsletters or whether it's reminders, calendar events, things of that nature. Those are going to be very effective for programs potentially for their clients from a trainer perspective. Those are going to be good ways to keep them on track without having to always, to lose their focus as well, because the positive aspects of a DR, they are so hyper-focused. If something is important, they'll get it done and they'll work really hard towards that. So you don't want to take away that driver. You want to find ways to accommodate it and support it with other means. So automation works really well for them. Yes.
Quick question. You mentioned OKR. I don't think we defined what that is. What is an OKR?
So objectives and key results. So this is kind of simultaneously as we're learning about the DISC when I'm working with people, they're also filling out OKRs, which I usually keep it to 3 objectives. I tend to find if there's more than 3, they're not necessarily big rocks anymore. So people will have 2 to 3 like primary objectives that they want to work on, either from a professional or from a just individual lifestyle standpoint. People I work with will put things that relate to obviously their business and their finances and their professional accomplishment, but they'll also put how to free up more time for their families, right? They'll put fitness goals on there, and that's fine, because I'm not judging what your objectives are. I just want to make sure that we actually set up an intelligent strategy or system to get there. So we identify the objectives, and then we identify 3 key results from each of those objectives. And the key results are the outcomes. And how I work with outcomes or people is identifying what their definition of success for those objectives actually is on an individual standpoint. So we look at it, if it's quantitative, we look at it quantitatively. If it's qualitative, we look at it emotionally. How do you want to feel? What's this going to lead to? What's this going to free time up for? From a quantitative standpoint, it could be anything. It could be money. It could be sessions. It could be weight, pounds lost. It could be whatever. Metrics are super easy to work with. Qualitative aspects are a little harder. So we have to be really honest and really dig deep into those. And within these, most people will fill them out and they'll kind of inherently be very vague or very general about their key results. So I always have to push them to just get as detailed as possible. Like we'll talk about them and people will break into more detail and conversation. And one of my big cues for people is to literally talk it out and then write down what you say. Like speak it, because you're inherently going to tell a story rather than having to write something down. And you're going to have more detail in the way you explain it and how you write it typically. So that's usually how I'll get people to kind of dig deeper and actually define success in a way that we might be able to measure. And then we set up strategies for all of those key results. And the strategies are gonna match the archetypes in a way, because they're probably going to be things that those people naturally tend to lack. So from a system standpoint, it's great because I usually don't have to identify systems for people. They can really look at what they're doing and what they're not doing, and they identify them themselves, which tends to be much more leads to much more adherence than me telling them what to do. So from an effectiveness standpoint, it's a lot of me helping them understand and come to that kind of realization themselves. Like, oh, maybe I should start, automating things or putting more things into my calendar, setting up back-end sales leads or funnels or whatever, building out more spreadsheets for tracking, automating my payroll, things of that nature. There's a lot of things that as we're going through this and they're looking at strategies like, oh yeah, I'm not sure why I ever thought about that, but they didn't think about it because they're from a coherence standpoint, they're usually looking in the other direction. So there's a lot of realization typically with that. And then we try to map it out. We look at it, what actions they can take from a weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual standpoint to get these things done, and how the best way to track them is, whether it's through channels regarding organization or structuring within their company or their business if they're trainers.
Yeah, that's really cool. And especially too, if someone comes to the conclusion themselves, they're more likely to execute it as opposed to being told what to do. And
yes,
that's perfect. So we'll dive back into the pitfalls of these four, but can you just give me an example of a typical objective and then the key results you might give for someone from one of your clients? And let's keep it from an organizational standpoint.
Yep. So looking at from a client standpoint, if I'm looking at trainers, right? It's increasing their client base. And so if you're looking at an objective of increasing your client base by 2 clients, right? From a key results standpoint, that's going to lead to X amount more money, right? That's going to lead to maybe that's even going to lead to the potential of upping your price and dropping a lower paying client in some cases. That's going to lead to some financial goal of moving, for people, the key results differ a lot. That might lead to being able to live in a different apartment if you're in New York City, right? Or living in a different neighborhood where you no longer have to commute 30 or 45 minutes into the city, right? So the key results are very individualistic. They're definitely contextual to the person. Everyone's got their own drivers from that perspective. But those are a few kind of broad things that apply to most people. So if you want to make more money, how much more money? So we're going to identify what's 2 clients going to bring in, maybe $1,500 a month, right? That's how we're going to track it. So if we're going to look at strategies, what's the timeline we're going to put on this? 2 new clients by when, right? 2 months. So we're looking at a client a month. What steps are we going to take from a marketing perspective? Are we going to look at referrals? Are we going to look at communicating with other scopes of practice for referrals? So you can look at client streams, and you can look at maybe a DPT team in the city that you can go and talk to and look at as being maybe their third-party outlet for training once somebody's done from the rehabilitation process. Maybe you can talk to massage therapists and look at them, nutritionists, same thing, and build an actual interscope team of practitioners that you might be able to be a part of, where you can share clients and build referral networks and things of that nature. So there's a lot of different avenues from a strategy perspective that we can start looking at. Maybe you're going to email all of your old clients that you've lost or call them, right? Depending on the trainer, there's going to be different avenues there. Another thing that I get with a lot of people is building up additional streams of revenue, right? Not everybody wants to take on more clients because that's more time training. They want something that might be more passive. So we work on building up their remote business, or we work on building like semi-private training channels where they can train more people with 1 hour and work more efficiently. And then we set up the strategies to utilize that. It's a lower price point. So who can you reach out to that maybe fell off one-on-one training because they either moved or the price point was no longer agreeable with their budget? Are these options for them? Can we start reaching out to those people? How do you market yourself? Are you looking through social media? Are you building out newsletters? So there's a lot of different options from that perspective, but we start looking at things that would actually fit their skill set and options they may have. And then we start setting timelines and scheduling out those things from an organizational standpoint.
Nice. So essentially what you're doing is you use the objectives and key results as kind of your skeleton, and then you are helping your clients build the rest of that out by having them figure out
what type of systems need to be employed, and then taking into account their personality base in terms of potential pitfalls they may have in building the system, so they ultimately get the outcome that they want. Is that fair?
Yeah, if you look at OKRs, like it's very conceptual, and then the individually we look at it very contextual, right, from a key result standpoint, and then strategies are going to be all your applications. So it really goes conceptually, contextually, and then applicably down the line. So the objectives are usually pretty broad, and then the key results we try to individualize as much as possible. Like I said, either qualitatively or quantitatively, depending on what that objective is. And then from a strategy standpoint, then it's all application. Based on their environment, their past, their unique circumstance, and their archetype, how can we build out strategies that are going to be beneficial for you and not have a high cost, but a high return instead?
Sounds very systematic, Kyle.
That's the idea.
Yeah, that's really good, man. I really like that. So let's go back to the 4 personality types and pitfalls. So we went through D, which is dominant, and they are the big thing that probably need to focus on is automation, as well as looking at problems more in depth, so they don't do something with a huge cost. And as I got like a little hint of D, the automation thing has been huge for me. I mean, I automate just about everything from a bill perspective, emails, everything, because it takes too much time if you don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But what about, say, someone who's an I and then S and C? Let's kind of go into the pitfalls that those 3 would have.
Yeah, I mean, from an archetype standpoint, an I is usually the archetype that has the most trouble with any organization at all. They are very sometimes described as chaotic in nature, where they kind of thrive in an environment with a lot of novelty. So because of that, familiarity becomes boring. And organization is a way to increase familiarity within your environment, right? So they typically are a little organizationally adverse. And so with them, it's kind of like, for me, it's I work with them on minimum effective dose, right? How can we implement just enough organization within your life that you're able to get things done when you need to get them done, but not overwhelm you into an adaptive quality, right? We don't want to turn you into a C. So automation also works really well with them, but it's also prioritizing what they actually need to organize. And for them, that's another big thing, because they're so chaotic is developing hierarchies within their lives is very important. Like what are we going to prioritize based on, again, your needs and wants from a lifestyle and professional standpoint? So a lot of it with them is just laying out from an awareness perspective, what is going to have the highest return, what is the most important, and what to focus on, because focus is limited. It's a limited individual quality for them. And then we're going to automate the rest as much as possible. We're going to set alerts on everything that's important from a calendar standpoint or a note standpoint, whatever. We're going to set deadlines for people. They don't do well without a structured deadline. They won't create a deadline for themselves usually. So they're people that need more ownership and accountability within their own personal frames. So with them, especially as I'm looking at OKRs and I look at strategies, the way it works out on the form that I use is you essentially have 3 objectives, and within each objective you have 3 key results potentially. And within each key result, you have 3 unique strategies that you might be able to employ. So you've got an option of 27 different strategies at the end of this thing. And I may be going to be able to implement 1 or 2 of those at any given time effectively. So it's looking at, from a prioritization standpoint, which strategies can we even implement? So the key with them is not actually the strategies themselves or developing them. It's which are we actually going to apply that's going to have the biggest bang for buck. Can we find strategies that are going to positively affect any of the other outcomes that we're looking at? So it's either you're looking at low-hanging fruit, things that are easy depending on the person's lifestyle, or you're looking at kind of more of a bang for buck strategy that might positively impact additional strategies. is, especially as we're looking at objectives and some of those key results, there's a little bit of crossover within that process for people.
Awesome. No, I think that's really good. And I mean, just hearing this, I mean, it's like, yes, that's me. And doing that for myself, because I was incredibly unorganized before I really until this past year. Just setting up a lot of the exact systems that you're talking about has been essential. So then what about the S and the C in terms of their common pitfalls and where you work with those types of people?
Yeah. For C's, it's a lot of structure. You know, they're pleasers by nature, and they tend to kind of put their own needs behind the needs of others, and they'll let a lot of their own personal growth go to the side a lot of the times, and be over accommodating to the people they're working with or to the clients they're working with. So it's a lot of structure. They do well typically with full calendar setups, with, you know, task lists, things of that nature, but you also still want to give them a little bit of autonomy. So there's got to be some flexibility in there as well. So doing a very good job of balancing the needs and the wants works very well for them. With them from an objective standpoint, I always try to have at least one lifestyle objective that kind of coheres with their professional objectives as well, and making sure that those things, both professionally and lifestyle wise, respectively, have a lot of coherence and alignment. If they're not aligned, neither one of them is going to get done, and that's going to lead to a lot of frustration and withdrawal within the systems. From a communication standpoint as well, because they're so accommodating, I try to also, again, prioritize their personal needs and make sure that they feel heard throughout the process and throughout whatever environment they're in, relationship-wise, either with clients or with their employers or employees or peers. So working on giving them a voice within that community as well, or an outlet of sorts.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. And I mean, it seems like the common trend is you're still getting all of them. And we haven't talked about S yet, so maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like the common trend with all these is you're still getting them to a similar point of having a goal in mind or an outcome they desire, and then setting up systems, whether it's automated or whether it's a calendar of some sort to help them keep them on task, essentially.
Yeah. What you find is D's and I's have no problem outlining outcomes and key results, but they typically try to go into action without setting strategies. And then you've got C's and S's will typically strategize quite a bit, but it's hard to push them into actual action. So you kind of prioritize those things differently depending on what side of the line they're on from an archetype standpoint. Gotcha.
So D's and I's, great at figuring out what the outcome is, but take a terrible, inefficient path to get there.
Sometimes,
S and C's, beautiful path, but to where, who knows?
Yeah, they might just be spinning in circles.
I hear you. So then tell me about the S then. What are some of the pitfalls that they have in terms of building out those systems?
Yeah, I mean, they'll, like I said, D's and S's C's and S's are very similar in the fact that they have no problem building out strategies and building out systems. Most of them, I found, and I'm someone who's a CS hybrid, so speaking to myself is a good example. I have Excel sheets that I've created that I'll never use. Like it's a hobby of mine to build out systems that aren't really needed in any way, right? It's sometimes that's a distraction of actually going to work and doing things, of being in action. So from a strategy standpoint, a lot of C's and S's lumped together, and S's especially, there is cutting down on the strategies and figuring out which ones are actually going to be the most important for them, because rather than getting distracted by all the potential outcomes, they're getting distracted by the strategies themselves. And that's where that whole kind of analysis by paralysis comes about with them, is they're they're just going to keep doing research. They're going to keep building out models and some of these things, but they never actually take action. And you know, so a lot of them, it's really setting timelines from a strategy standpoint on my behalf. It's like, okay, so we've got these systems in place for you. We've narrowed the systems down now to ones that are actually going to lead to an outcome that, you know, efficiently that we want to get to. Now let's put a timeline on it. Like, how do we keep you accountable to a timeline? Because otherwise they will stall themselves by doing more research or building out more spreadsheets. So it's when can we take action? So them, it's a more of a time push than anything else.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's incredibly helpful. And then as you progress and work with these people, because it seems like you have to instill new habits with everyone. And as we all know, old habits die hard. Sometimes we falter back into our own, I don't want to say bad habits, but maybe habits that aren't going to push you towards your goals. How do you instill coming back to these when someone does falter? So me, for example, I'm pretty good at,
you just can't leave our yard.
I'm pretty good at staying on task for most things, but I definitely do find myself sometimes, you know, procrastinating or doing something that's going to be adaptive towards me getting my stuff completed. So what kind of things do you use to cue them back into getting back into the system when they do fall off the wagon?
Well, the good thing is, as we go through the disc itself, is it's usually creates enough self-awareness that they know when they've fallen off the wagon. You know, they're very aware of that fact. And with both the consulting I do and the mentorship that I do, I'm on the phone or on a Zoom video with them every week. So we're always rehashing what their week will actually look like, what their OKR development and progress looks like. We also build out models, like actual business and training models, how that's going. I share everything through Google Drive so I can see live what's being worked on, when it's being worked on. So if I see that their OKRs haven't been touched in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we're going to go back to that and ask why, right? That's the good thing about some of those shared documents, is there's built-in accountability within that. And they know what I'm going to ask, you know, when we're on the phone. They kind of know the structure of what the conversation is going to be. And, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about the disc up front, but then we eventually move more into OKRs and model development. And then anything else that might have popped up within their lives or their work environment that they want to talk about, you know, just in context in the moment. But yeah, it's a lot of, I don't necessarily have to pull them back on track, because within the first few weeks, they have enough self-awareness within their archetype, within their organizational needs and structural needs, that they know if they fell off track. And they'll usually actually bring that up before I get a chance to. And then we just talk about why, right? And the biggest thing that I work with all of the archetypes on, regardless of who they are, is letting them know that that's okay, right? It's at the end of the day, these are all tools that are going to, you know, be used to help them. And we're all going to go about it on different ways. And whether we're talking about weekly progress or monthly progress, it's still progress. They're still doing things much differently than they would have done in the past, and they're having good positive outcomes based on that. Some of the archetypes like a little more accountability from me, particularly usually the D's and the C's. Prefer if I'm, you know, I don't want to say harder on them, but I hold them a little more accountable. Whereas the I's and the S's, I need to handle a little differently with my communication and make sure they understand that I'm empathetic to what's going on within their lives and within their work environments. And from a time perspective, they might not have gotten it done. So we just set up ways that we can work through the next week a little more efficiently. We look at maybe what those pitfalls were in the prior week, and we try to find ways to work around them in the week upcoming.
Grayson.
were those pitfalls novel and acute? Was it something where, you know, you got sick, or you had to take your dog to the vet, or your kid had, you know, multiple scoring, you know, school events or sports events, or was it something that's going to be more global, that's going to be happening every single week, that we really have to start adjusting for within our strategy, because it's not going away. So identifying whether or not it was a one-off thing or whether it's going to be continual is also a big part of that conversation.
So essentially what you're acting as when you're setting this up is some form of social support. Is that?
There's a lot of that.
Yeah, because I think that you're kind of lauded, or maybe it's you get a really big pat on the back if you are someone who is considered self-made, and really no one is self-made.
No.
You know, I mean, people think that I'm doing fairly good things, but we wouldn't even be having this conversation, Kyle, if it weren't for someone like Bill Hartman in my life, or other people in my life who have pushed me into such a high esteem and high level and high drive. And I think that even someone maybe on the D&I side of things, they tend to think of pushing others by the wayside, because sometimes I do that. And I think that's having someone not necessarily to hold you accountable, but just to be there with you as you're going through the process and keep you on track is just absolutely critical. And I think it's awesome that you're doing that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. And the good thing about my career path with a lot of the people I work with is I've been in a role that they're in or very similar to for most of them. As far as being a trainer, being a manager, being a multi, location manager, to being a department head, to being a national level position, there's a lot of things that I've done in that respect where I can, sympathize and empathize a lot with the needs that they're seeing, and give them some usually pretty good real world advice with that as well, especially from a management and leadership perspective. If they're a gym owner, right? Like, I haven't owned my own gym, but I do know the things that go into running a space and managing a team and handling the operations and day-to-day logistics of that. From a trainer, same thing. I've done 200 sessions a month as a trainer, and I've lived that 7-day-a-week life, and the 3:30 alarm going off in the morning and working till 8 p.m. at night. I've lived a lot of the struggles that they're going through, and can look back on it with kind of a hindsight eye and understand, things that might help them that I never had access to when I was in those roles, and work with them from both from an archetype standpoint, but also from an experiential standpoint.
Okay. Perfect, man. That's really cool. Now we've kind of discussed overarching principles in terms of how you build out these systems. You have your OKRs, and then you're kind of having that individual trickle in and building their systems in such a manner that they can get the outcomes that they want. Let's get into some specifics. What type of things, and I mean, we can talk software, we can talk if you're using paper, what type of things have you found most successful? It can be apps, anything from an organizational standpoint that you try to employ with the people that you work with. I mean, do you use Google Calendar? Do you use the iPhone calendar? What we got?
Yeah, with a lot of my clients, I try not to task them with a lot of apps. Rather, I try to kind of keep everything as a one-stop shop. So I just use Google Drive with the majority of them. For a few, it's a free service, and that's something that I think is important for a lot of my clients. And a lot of them don't actually understand all the functions that Drive has. It's like, if you have a Gmail, you have a calendar, you have spreadsheets, you have Word docs, you have Google Forms, you have things that you can set up to send to clients. You've got Keynote and some of those other access as far as, setting up presentations. You've got a lot of the tools that you would need already at your fingertips, and you just haven't started using them yet. So what I'll usually work with them on is first making sure their calendar is always up to date, that they have as many things reoccurring as possible within that calendar, They have alerts set if needed. They've added the event participants respective to the event as needed. And then from there, they can identify, what might be flexible and what might be inflexible from an event perspective. What can I move and how can I move it, right? I can set up, and then we can also add in all the one-off things that built around the continuous events as well as we go. So if you've got new clients coming in, if you've got, different meetings being set up, you can start identifying where you can put those within your calendar as it stands on a week-to-week basis. And then from a drive perspective, it's all about, building out folders, identifying, it might be built around your objectives or it might be built around other things, but, segmenting your business through revenue streams or departments, whatever it may be, and making sure that you have all the materials needed set up within those folders. And you have the ability to share them with employees or with clients. If you're a trainer, it might be all your training templates. It might be all the data that you record from a biometric standpoint. Your folders might all just be your client names. You've got your templates, you've got your materials in there. I use the Google Forms a lot. My intake forms are all on them as well because I can just send them via email. So that's another thing from an intake perspective. You can build out part queues and intake forms on there, send them to your clients ahead of time. You can build out feedback forms, daily questionnaires for clients. So I use that for all of my, whether it's mentorship, consulting, or training, all the clients that I work with in those realms. And that gives me easy access to their answers. It gives them easy access to their answers. And if I'm doing consulting within a staff, I can also look at analytics based on the questions that I'm asking. So within those forms, I use a lot of numbered rating systems, so I can actually look at analytics based on a number scale or numerical scale as well over an entire staff. If we're talking about culture or leadership or things of that nature. Out all your slides, building out presentations. So a lot of what I use with people is it's Google. It's instead of SurveyChimp, I use Google Forms. Right? They'll have some kind of app within their system that usually matches the needs of whoever I'm working with, and it does it for free, and it does it all in one spot. If you have a Google Suite, if your company's built around that, it's even that much easier to utilize. So from an app perspective, that's how I set up all my materials. I build out the majority of my own, and that's, it's all just shareable at that point. So I can share and copy and share and create for all the people I'm working with.
In terms of automation on Google, are you able to set up, say you have client so-and-so, can you automate it in a manner that all your intakes and all that will automatically go to the folder on Google that is specific for that person? Or do you have to, they fill out the form and then you're transposing it into that?
Well, you can do it one of two ways. You can you can automate to where the forms actually will go into that client's folder, or you can keep all the forms together in one spot to look at analytics. So you can do it a couple different ways, and that's different. People are going to have different preferences and purposes regarding that. When I look at like my intake form, I will basically, I have an original copy that I'll copy and create another one for the individual themselves that will live inside their folder once I send it and they fill it out. For a lot of my consulting and feedback forms, I'll keep those all together as one form where I can do multiple responses at once and then look at analytics based on answers. So depending on the purpose, you can do either one of them.
Nice. That's really cool. I think because right now I'm transitioning over to Google because I've had too many steps with transmitting information from one place to the next. So I'll give you an example of my current setup. So someone sends a Google form to me and they want to work with me. That will go into Google form, and it's just the whole analytical side of things where you can compare answers and whatnot. I'll have my virtual assistant
send that person a inquiry via email, but it's the answer within the email as opposed to a Google form.
Yep.
And then what I have to do is I take those answers, because I can't read it on Excel because Excel's just atrocious for that. I have to put it into Evernote, read it on Evernote, and then I will then summarize within the Excel, and it's just too many steps. But it sounds as though if you keep things in one place, you know, yeah, sure, Google's going to know everything about you, but you're not that important anyways. So
They probably would have anyway.
you're not like Miley Cyrus or something.
No.
Not that she's important either, but it seems as though if you can keep things automated as much as possible and under one platform, it just tends to make life that much simpler.
Yeah, it's just less tabs, right? It's less copy and pasting. It's less transfiguring and reconfiguring from a data standpoint. And you've got everything just in one handy spot. And especially when you look at different archetypes, the more you can keep things together and the less different avenues they have to continuously click on, the better off they're going to be from a distraction standpoint. You know, it also keeps everything top of mind to keep it all together in that manner.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think you've officially sold me on making the transition to the Google. So
They're going to send me some money when they see this. It's going to
they most certainly will. Most certainly will. But no, what
can't wait for my
probably happened is they've already put it into our brains somehow that we were going to change all things.
You're going to see a bunch of like Facebook ads for Google and all kinds of things. It's going to be amazing.
Google and compound performance. That's all it's going to be.
That's all it's going to be.
But here's an interesting thing, though. Interesting side note. Did you know on your phone there's an option to that they will mark it for you, and it's checked on automatically if you have an iPhone, and you can eliminate that.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll link this in the show notes too. But I don't know if you went checked out that whole just set up your phone for success thing.
No, I haven't read it yet. It is sitting in my inbox, so.
Man, life changing.
I'm on your newsletter, believe me.
I know you are, Kyle.
I'm on that.
But I'll link that. But there is an option on somewhere in the settings on the iPhone where it says, yes, you can advertise to, or I can take your data and advertise it to whatever sites. So you have to wonder, why is it that I look up leg lamps to buy someone for Christmas, and all of a sudden I see leg lamps all over Facebook and Google and everything, and that's why.
Well, it's even, I mean, my wife and I, it's the whole thing is that we'll have conversations about something verbally, and we'll start, like, we might be talking about rugs, right? Something like super boring in that regard. And I'll start looking, like, on my Facebook and Instagram, I'll literally get rug, like, adverts after advert for the next 2 weeks. And I'm just like, it's insane. Like, especially if you talk about a brand, that brand is going to be there. You don't even have to type it or look it up. You can just talk about it, and that microphone's always on.
Yeah. It's
a tinfoil hat.
There you go. Tinfoil hat and move out into the wilderness.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way you can circumvent Facebook and Google and all of those people.
I mean, live that bin house lifestyle, except, cut off the phone too.
Yeah. No, he's figured something out, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Are there any other systems or nitty gritty tech that you like to use before I go into another follow up question?
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think I actually like a lot more and has been more meaningful for a lot of my clients than even the OKRs is developing a model that's based more so on experience, both the client and the trainers, rather than methodologies. Especially from a training perspective, is identifying what you want that client to feel and experience through each part of your training, their training life, their training program, rather than just identifying how you're going to train them from a technical standpoint. Because methodologies are going to change, right? We're all doing X now, but we're all doing something differently 2 or 3 years ago. And at that point, it's pretty naive to think that we're still going to be doing the same thing we're doing now in the next 6 months even. You know, the industry and information changes so quickly. So when I'm working with trainers, they're, you know, a lot of them tend to be very biased to one methodology or ideology over another. And they like to talk in those terms, and they have a hard time relating things in the terms that, you know, obviously communicating things in the terms that clients want to understand. But they also have a hard time identifying what that client preference might be and what they want their experience to be during a session. So I look at everything from, again, consult to intake to the actual training session itself, you know, movement prep, neural prep, strength training, ancillary training, accessory training, whatever you want to call it, to aerobics and cool down, to their macro cycling of anaerobic and aerobic training, and then to their lifestyle coherence and communication. You know, what do you want that client to feel from an emotional perspective? What's your outcome for each of those things? And then what are the outcomes that you're looking for as a trainer? Can we get alignment between those two things? And if you can get alignment between those two things, you're going to have a client that's pretty happy, or a client base or demographic that's pretty happy. So that's the other big thing, you know, kind of the other big rock that I start people on once we start getting comfortable with the OKRs, we start talking about the actual model itself. And it can be easily modified into a company thing, you know, and looking at, you know, what is your business model? How do you want your entire demographic to be, you know, looked at from a training life perspective, to a personal training model and looking at the individual experience of your clients as well. But that's also kind of the big thing that I think has been eye-opening to a lot of the people that I'm working with is not just identifying how you're going to train people, but also identifying how you're going to treat people and how you want them to perceive what that training actually is. What's that outcome? Like, we're not, you know, not just talking about increasing internal rotation of the femur, we're talking about their actual enjoyment of the process itself.
That's great. I like that a lot. And I think that's, I mean, just me setting up human matrix has given me an idea in terms of setting up models. But I think in some of the other areas that you've mentioned in terms of creating a good experience or just even a business model, those are areas that I haven't done, but I think would be incredibly impactful. When you're having people set up these models, is there a preference, or are you using this in organization in any way of using the good old paper, in particular a Nintendo notebook?
That's amazing. Oh, that's the original is nice there too.
Yeah, NES for sure. Even though, you know, I was more of a Super NES guy, but yeah.
Oh, me too. Ninja Turtles all day.
Ooh, okay. I was more of an RPG kind of guy because I was super nerdy. I mean, I still am.
Fair bars.
Yep. And now the internet thinks I'm a loser. And that was the end of Zach's career. So
never. Well, no, I've got everything. I've got a template that I've created that help people set up, and I've got, again, kind of a base skeleton of the things that I consider important, but they have the option as well of adding additional columns or rows off of that template based on things that might apply to them individually and their business individually. So I've got a base template that, you know, they all have their own copies. We share it and we look at it. But they can also modify it, or I can modify it for them based on any changes or things that they want to prioritize within their own business. In addition to my columns are kind of methodology, client experience, and trainer outcomes. But different people are going to add an additional column, or maybe they're going to add additional rows based on how they communicate with people. Whether it's, you know, both in person and you're looking at actual, like, how are you communicating? How are you greeting people? How are you greeting them at the door? How are you communicating with them? How are you cueing them? Internal, external cues, hands-on, hands-off cueing. And then how are you communicating them from a newsletter standpoint, from an educational standpoint, and then from like an email, texting standpoint, calling standpoint, feedback forms, whatever. So there's also ways that we can start including those within that process as well, from an experiential standpoint.
Nice. Essentially automating everything within the model, just like you did with everything else. Making processes. That's
and identifying what that actually means, right? It's, you know, if you're sending feedback forms, what do you want that client to, you know, what's the reaction that you want them to have? Are they going to just discard it and not fill it out? Or are they going to feel like, part of the team, and you're trusting them and valuing their opinion to improve the actual culture of the company? Right. So what actual emotional outcome are you looking for, and how can we generate that outcome through the process or through the environment itself as a whole?
Awesome. Yeah, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. Now, this is kind of a polarizing topic, to-do lists, yay or nay?
It depends, right? I think as everything does.
Always an answer, always a default answer. That's the proverbial mic drop.
I think they can become very valuable, but I think they can also become very encapsulating. And in that sense, that if you're a C that already lives on to-do lists, you probably don't need to make any more. You probably actually just need to prioritize and take action to the top 2 or 3 things on that list. If you're a I, and there's really not a lot of rhyme or reason of what you're doing and when you're doing it, and you're just chasing novelty all day long, and the to-do list is going to be very important for you, and that might help you kind of obtain a singular focus on the things that you're actually going to be doing on a daily basis or weekly basis. So depending on who the person is, I think those are going to be great. If somebody's already super analytical, you're just giving them one more thing to feed on that's going to delay the actual action and outcome that they're seeking. So it might be a deterrent at that point, depending on who they are.
Yeah. I think one thing I found with myself for the to-do list is, if you don't prioritize the right things and then there's no temporal component, it's pretty much a useless piece of.
Well, you'll kind of get this inception moment where you've got like to-do lists on top of other to-do lists, right?
Yes.
And that's like what a C would do, and sometimes even a D is you've got a to-do list that lists out like doing another to-do list, and then it's like the guy looking at himself in a mirror all the way through.
That's a great visual.
Right? And it's like this inception of to-do lists, but nothing ever actually gets done. So it's just a way for overly analytical individuals. Planning is a distraction in itself. A lot of the times, like researching is a distraction in itself. When you start talking about actual outcomes, and there's always more studies to draw from EBSCO or PubMed. There's always, you can always find more information. You can always look at more studies. You can always run more testing. You can always run more assessments in your training protocol. But if you're spending all your time looking at assessments and not actually training somebody or not actually taking action in a workplace, what are you really doing, right? And so for a to-do list is not probably beneficial for them. It's more so like we need to drive action, like quit making lists and start doing things, from that respect.
I love it.
Yeah. It depends on who it is, and it's with a lot of the archetypes, and we're setting up strategies. Like I look at low-hanging fruit, like what are easy measures that we can implement that are going to take very little effort to do, but yield good results. And then I look at kind of bang for buck as far as, once we've done that low-hanging fruit, what can we now prioritize that's going to have the biggest overall effect on all the other objectives? At that point, a to-do list might be applicable, it might not.
Yeah.
But yeah, for a lot of people, it's just one more piece of paper.
For sure. I mean, essentially what you're doing is from my perspective. So what I do is I find out what movements someone can't do, and we get them to do that. So if we're talking a movement alphabet, right? And I said this at Human Matrix, it's if they got A through F, we want to get them G through Z, extra emphasis on the Z, if you know what I mean, right? You're essentially doing the same thing. If someone is all about to-do lists, but they don't have a goal in mind, you're giving them the goal and you're trying to push them towards that. Whereas someone might be goal-driven, but they don't have that to-do list, then you're just inputting that, and it could be.
Yeah, we look at, how can we raise the floor in that perspective? Give them what they don't have. And Yeah, and it's also like it's task driven, right? It's when you look at assessments and you look at interventions and from a training perspective, and then you look at like training protocols, is everything that you're actually implementing into that session or that program even task or environment dependent for the client, or are you just putting in things because you want to put in things, you know, or testing things because, you know, a methodology told you to. Is that even important to the person? You know, so it's really, it's raising the floor. It's seeing what's actually important for that individual and implementing it. And sometimes it's more organization and sometimes it's more doing. It's completely dependent on the person. But telling a D or an I to do more without structure isn't going to lead to anything. And telling a C or an S to structure more and strategize more without doing is going to lead to a lot of spreadsheets that nobody uses.
I hear you. So you either got to do or you either got to structure, and give them a little bit of that, and they ought to be in business.
Yep.
Cool.
Exactly.
Cool. Last question, because I know we've been talking for a hot minute. I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. But so you're using a lot of technology, sounds like, to organize. That seems to be the key, or I would say where you're building the system, which makes sense because technology makes it easy. But I know where I struggle, as well as others, is these things have a lot of distractions on them.
Yes.
No, you got to take your hourly Instagram selfie like I do. You have, I mean, it's like you have a slot machine in your pocket at all times.
It's that dopamine, right? That
it is.
The iPhone is the slot machine.
It absolutely is. So I guess this is going to be a two-part question. When you have someone setting up a system, how do you get them to stay on task within that little system? How do we keep them in Google Drive without going towards the scrolling on Facebook or looking up kitty cats on IG? One, that would be my first question. And then, well, why don't we start with that, and then we'll go with the final question, or maybe you'll answer it.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I mean, if we could truly figure that out, we'd probably have a lot of solutions for major social drivers within our current environment as well.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I think, you know, setting a little bit of urgency on some of these things is usually the key. And it just goes back to even the way that I've worked in leadership in the past is I don't necessarily care how long you work on something. I care about, you know, getting that something done. What'd you accomplish? So, for a lot of people, it's like, if we can just prioritize the task itself over the internet surfing, or schedule in, like for someone who really needs a little bit of novelty in their lives and can't just work with their phone in the other room all day, let's schedule out a social media break. Like, we don't need to overcomplicate it and say, hey, you know, every 2 hours, take 10 minutes or 15 minutes to see what's going on in the world around you and kind of quench that FOMO a little bit, and then go back to work. You know, can we organize even that aspect of your life if that's what's needed? And, you know, for people who are more introverted and overly analytical, I do the same thing, as far as it's like, hey, you know, every 2 or 3 hours, let's take 20 minutes and go outside and take a walk. Like, let's get off the computer and just take a walk, get out and, you know, with other people if you're isolated, and make sure that you're kind of feeding that bucket and you're not just holed up in your office or living room all day. But with social media, it's like, I think we're to a point now where taking it away is not going to lead to any sort of adherence, right? Elimination of social media is going to be impossible for just about everybody. Like, everybody's so far ingrained in it now that they'll choose it over a task for the most part. So in my perspective, it's kind of like, well, let's schedule in a time where you can get your minimum effective dose of Instagram, right? It's the same thing.
I'm going to quote you on that. That's awesome.
It's the bicep curls of functional training, right? Like, you know, if you work for an hour and 45 minutes, you can look at social media for 15 minutes. That's totally fine. Set an alarm if you need to, right? Put you can now set your social media on your phone to where it'll turn off after a certain amount of time. right? So give yourself 10 minutes or give yourself 15 minutes to kind of surf your channels, take that selfie that we all enjoy. I enjoy it.
I enjoy selfies of you, Kyle. That's for sure.
Yeah. And then when it, it closes down, you're back to work. Right. Because I just don't, when we're talking about things of this nature, elimination of that strong of a driver for a lot of people is going to lead to just trashing the whole structure and altogether. It's going to lead to frustration over time. And it's like someone who stops a training program because they're not doing the arm work they want to do, right? Or they're not getting the aesthetic results they want to do because they're so busy working on, functional training or respiration or something of that nature. And they stop before they start seeing the results because those are more long-term adaptations. Like, dopamine's powerful, man. We need if we need a fix, we need a fix, and that's fine. Like, I'm not trying to feed addiction, but I do think you can set it up to where you can still get your work done and actually truly make it a reward. You really truly want to maximize dopamine, and in this case, social media, delay it 2 hours and get some work done, right? That anticipation is going to be a stronger driver than actually looking at it itself. So give yourself 2 hours of work, set an alarm, do whatever you need to do, turn on your phone, look at it, and then go back to work. And hopefully you can feed both mechanisms in that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's powerful stuff. And it's what I've struggled with the social stuff myself. And I'm more of an elimination guy than not, personally. Mm-hmm. But what I have substituted instead was actually going out and talking to people.
No.
Well, but it's just like that. But that, like, so me, I live in Podunk, California right now. Yeah. I'll be moving to Podunk, Arizona in a minute. And I think that a lot of times we look at that because everyone is busy. Everyone is so consumed with their lives, especially in our industry, because we're all trying to be successful. And we lack that social outlet. And if you can tame social media in the way you are advocating, and then it could be potentially beneficial. I just found for myself that, so what I do is I actually have the apps deleted off my phone, and then I'll load them back up when I need to post something, and I'll scroll for a little bit, and that's literally all the fix I need. But what I had to do to really circumvent that is schedule conversations with people. I think if you get it one way or another, I think it's good. Even though I would be more inclined to conversations.
Oh yeah. Well, and I would never supplement social media over actual real engagement.
For sure.
Right. But also what you're saying is a more extroverted archetype, is a DI hybrid. You feed off relationships and interacting with individuals. That might be terrifying for a more introverted seat.
Very true.
Right. So again, like, strategies are going to be a little dependent, for them. Like, what I do myself is I'll do the beginnings, the first 3 hours of my day, typically in a coffee shop or in the library rather than at home, because I work from home. Mm-hmm. And just so I'm around people, but I don't have to necessarily interact with people. Right. Like, I put my headphones on. I'm not a recluse. I'm not a hermit. And I'll go drink a coffee, maybe have a little bit of breakfast, and I'll crank out 2 to 3 hours of work from a place where they're, a social environment, but I'm also not necessarily interacting with those people, having conversations, because I don't want to do that. It sounds bad, but I don't, it's like, no. It is what it is. But I do need to be in an environment where other people are. Whereas, in IRNS, if you're spending 3 hours in a coffee shop, you might not actually get that much work done because you're talking to everybody. So it depends on the person. But I completely agree. I would never try to replace an actual social environment or social engagement with person to person with the use of social media, even though that's kind of what it tries to do.
For sure.
But yeah, I do the same thing. I delete apps and look at them only when I want to post something. So I usually try to post. You'll see my posts go up at 5 o'clock in the morning. like when I'm training, and then I try to delete the app and not be on it really for the rest of the day. So there's definitely, I probably utilize a lot of the same strategies you do. But for somebody who is more tied into that, I want to work with what they have. And a lot of people can't go cold turkey. And right, I don't want to lose them by trying to tell them that's the only way to go about it. Because that is a hard strategy for a lot of different people. But that's a much deeper, probably, conversation.
Yeah, that might have to be part two. That might have to be part
yeah, that's some rabbit holes there, probably.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it's just like, and maybe it's me being more perceptive of just sometimes when I'm interacting with people, like if I'm getting together with a bunch of old friends or whoever, or even if I'm just out by myself, I just see so many people on their phones, and when they're with other people.
Yeah.
And
it's in New York, it was the craziest thing.
I can imagine.
I mean, you would walk on streets with thousands of other people, and everybody is like this, right? I would see people even in tourist groups, like that were out you could tell they were trying to look at the city, and they were on their phones talking to friends back home. It's like, you got the Empire State Building right here, you got the High Line or whatever, and they're like on Instagram looking at pictures from friends back wherever they came from, rather than being in the moment and understanding they're in New York and enjoying the environment they're actually in is a novel experience. And it's wild, right? But people walk just face down everywhere they go and don't really appreciate the people around them. And, I've heard more than once that New York is the most actually socially isolating place in America.
I believe it.
There's more people there, but there's less actual interaction and engagement on a personal, real level, because everybody is doing their own thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds as though, even if I'm a little bit more of an extreme guy, as I'm sure you would envision, but even when you're scheduling social media breaks, you're still creating a sense of presence within whatever I'm doing at this given moment. And while I've taken a more extreme approach to it, because I know that if I go down that rabbit hole, it's just like, for me, drinking. And I was never an alcoholic or a big drinker ever, but I know that if I go too far down that path, I just would never be able to get out. So I just don't.
Yeah.
But I think if you can create presence within the moment with whatever you're doing, whether it's you and me broing out, or I'm working on a task, or I'm on social media, I'm only focusing on that one thing. And if I have that one thing in the moment, then I'm more likely to hit my OKRs that are meaningful to both my business, myself personally, and anything else. Yeah. So, go ahead.
I mean, that's the thing, is strategies are going to be independently, they're going to be different, right? Depending on who the person is. And that's part of the entire process, is figuring out what strategies work for you. And this is a very good example, especially if you can look at it on a broader scale of being more than social media or more than distraction from apps, of figuring out what actually works for you. Are we looking at elimination? Are we looking at substitution? Are we looking at scheduled intervention? There's a lot of different ways to go about it, and different things are going to work well for different people based on their experience, their environment, and their actual tasks.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Okay, I promise this is the last question, because I think this is a good segue. Procrastination. Obviously, sometimes with the scheduling stuff, like for social media, for example, we will use that to procrastinate. What type of strategies do you advocate? I'm sure it's an individualized basis, but what type of strategies do you advocate to either get people started or to help break people from those distractions in order to complete tasks?
For a lot of people with procrastination, if you can get them to enjoy the actual task itself and the process itself, they'll do it, right? So there's a lot of kind of assigning value to the things that we do early on, and leading them to understand how. And that's part of the reason we do the OKRs is for them to identify that the strategies are actually leading to something that's important to them. Right? It's kind of self-checking in itself in that way. And then also with people who are more prone to procrastination, adding urgency to the mix, right? If you look at the continuum of importance to urgency, the big difference there is adding a time frame for most people. So if you can set deadlines for people who struggle with procrastination and have them also understand the importance and the value of what they're doing, you can typically get away, around that, and then I think just the kind of constant contact and checking in on them, making sure that they're on task or they're up to date, whether it's my actual weekly call with them. If I have people that need more than that, I'll send them an email or a text here and there to just see how they're going from an organizational and from a process standpoint, because that's another great way of think for the Google Drive stuff is I can see when they last checked into it. I can look at all their activity on any document that they're supposed to be working on. So if there's no activity there, I know that I might need to check up on them and say, hey. So you just never know from that standpoint. But I can always look at the documents themselves and see if they've been on them. And then I can, look at, through our conversation, see the correlation between their progress and how satisfied they are with the actual work they're doing based on their interaction with the materials themselves. But urgency and value are typically my two go-tos there.
I like it. That's perfect, man. That's really cool, because part of that was a selfish question, because I am a big time procrastinator, and I will have to apply those a bit more. Well, Kyle, this was outstanding. You are, I already respected you to the nth degree, but now you done changed the game, fam. That's all I can say. So thank you so much for answering all these questions. And I'm sure that the listeners are going to want to know, where can we find this dude? Where are you send people to?
Yeah, the Instagram is just Compound Performance with an underscore after it.
Okay. And I'll link it in the show notes too. So yeah.
Yeah. And then Facebook is just me, or I do have a Compound Performance page as well.
Okay.
And the website is compoundperformance.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, Kyle, thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun. I like talking about this stuff, and I don't talk about it enough with people around my site. So thank you. Is there anything else you want to tell the fam who are listening in to you?
Man, I think we covered it all, man. This is good. This was good.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Keep it real, but not taking some where things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving, and we'll see you next time. Deuces. Ooh, fam, recognize fam.
I got you.
Appreciate you, big dog.